Welcome to the Overdrive Outdoors podcast,
your source for everything outdoors.
Let's kick it into overdrive.
Overdrive Outdoors podcast brought to you by Predator Hunter Outdoors. Whether you are new to predator hunting or looking to upgrade your equipment, Predator Hunter Outdoors will have you hunting after the sun goes down. Carrying a full line of lights, night vision, and thermal optics, along with tripods, calls, mounting systems, and more, check them out at www.predatorhunteroutdoors.com or on Facebook at Predator Hunter Outdoors. Use promo code OVERDRIVE2021 for 20% off your order. Want to lengthen your time in the field and shorten your scouting time? Not only does the HuntWise app show you property boundaries, landowners' names, and in some cases even their phone number, but using the app will show you the wind direction on the map of the place you want to hunt. And the HuntCast feature shows peak movement times for various species, including predators. Get the HuntWise app at www.huntwise.com, the Google Play Store, or the Apple App Store. For only $59.99 a year for Pro or $119.99 a year for Elite. Use promo code OVERDRIVE20 for 20% off an annual membership.
Thank you everybody so much for listening to this week's podcast. Please make sure to tune in again next week. And if you haven't yet, go back and listen to the previous episodes. Leave us a rating and review. That'll help this podcast get out there to more and more people. And if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, have anything specific you'd like to talk about, please reach out to us. We have our Instagram and Facebook pages, as well as our YouTube channel. Check them all out. As always, we appreciate everybody who's been here with us for so long and followed along with us. Without all of you, we honestly could not do what we do. So thank you very much, and we look forward to bringing you more content. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Overdrive Outdoors podcast. I'm your host, Josh Mapes, and tonight we got Chris Wakefield and Ross Graveling. Graveling, right?
Yep.
All right, there's an A in there. It could be Grav or Grave, so let's say Graveling.
We'll say Grav.
So Ross Graveling, and Ross is with Sportsperson Ministries International, who we've done quite a few things with. I mean, you guys hold a coyote tournament every year. I don't know if we will be this year. Any information on that one?
I'm planning to second weekend of February, like normally.
Nice.
So.
I mean, we've pretty much got to do that one anymore because me and Joe, was that the first one you ran?
Yeah,
that we
the first
won
one that you guys won. Yep.
And there wasn't a whole lot of people in it at that point, but now it seems like it's taken off quite a bit. There was a lot of teams last year, even in the bad weather.
I think there was 31 or 32 teams last year even with the bad weather that was there. There's a lot of snow last year.
Yeah, and on that one, I elected to just help with the check-in. I was sitting that one out. But what's going on with you, Chris?
Not a whole lot. A lot of scouting for season this year.
Yeah.
Getting ready. I feel behind. Usually I don't, but this year, even though I'm not really that far behind, I feel like I'm behind on getting ready.
Yeah, I am too. Most people know I only hunt public, so I feel like I can almost never be ready enough because there's so much ground.
Yeah, you have a lot more public by you than I do.
Yeah, and then you talk about going north, and we just were looking at maps earlier, and there's tons of property up there where we're going to, and it's like, how can you ever run out of property when you're hunting public land? Do you do any public land hunting?
That's all I do in Michigan.
Okay.
So
I didn't know what you did here because I know you have ground in Illinois, right?
That at least.
Okay.
Yeah. So I lease ground down there, and I've done tons of public land all over.
Yep.
So
what's your go-to public land method here? I mean, are you a stand guy? Are you wearing a saddle?
I do stands.
Okay.
So I have the lone wolf with sticks.
Yep.
And
nice.
That's what I go and throw up. So
that's what I ended up switching to this year. Trying to get more mobile to where I'm not leaving stands on state ground. I'm not having to drag in and out stands every year to different spots. I switched so that I can hopefully not let the deer know where I'm at all the time.
Well, and I just don't know how you would ever trust leaving a stand on public land.
Especially when it's a lone wolf.
Yeah, there's no way I'd leave a lone wolf on public land.
My public land stands are all $50 stands off Facebook Marketplace. That way, if they disappear, it's okay. I'll go get another.
Well, it is. What is it? Wednesday the 15th right now, and right now this weekend sucked for the youth hunt. I mean, it went from 50s last week to 80s
at night.
Yeah, at night to 70s in the mornings and evenings this weekend during the youth hunt. But now on Wednesday the 15th, 3 days later, we got rising pressure, and it's probably, dang near 20 degrees cooler right now?
67 degrees right now.
Yeah, it's almost 20 degrees cooler, and my cameras on public are blowing. I just got another picture.
Yeah, let's not look at those.
So my cameras are blowing up, and these are spots that I took the boys all weekend, and we had no luck. But we're going to actually recap that weekend in the podcast we're recording on Friday. So tonight, though, we wanted Ross to come in. And Ross, why don't you just go ahead and tell us, who you are, how long you've been hunting, how you got into this, and then, kind of tell us about SPI and what that's all about.
So I grew up in a family that hunted and fished, and so my dad was super involved in the outdoor stuff, and took me long before I could start hunting. Thanksgiving weekend, I would always go up north with him and do a little gun hunt with him and a couple buddies and a couple kids, and then periodically he would bring me and let me sit in a stand with him or track deer or things like that. And so grew up absolutely loving it. Back then, you had to be 12 to bow hunt. Mm-hmm. And so my birthday's the middle of October, and so I got an early birthday present that year and got a bow and was probably only pulling, maybe 30 pounds as a little 12-year-old, but practiced, had it all ready. So when my birthday came in the middle of October, I got to go up north for a weekend. And so I think a huge part, I had a passion for it and a love for it. But the very first night in the stand, I missed a doe, and my dad, who was 75 yards away, I watched his arrow go in a buck, and then it run past me and die.
Oh, nice.
So that was a pretty good, and the deer were just moving crazy that whole weekend. We were on public land up in Branch and seen all kinds of bucks and deer, and I missed a buck, and I mean it was. I didn't need much to fuel what already was in me when it came to that, but that certainly didn't hurt. That first weekend of me actually being able to hunt, I had all kinds of action. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, from there, loved hunting, kind of ditched fishing for the most part, and just was passionate about hunting, and especially deer with a bow. And that grew to just after high school, started traveling out of state, went down to Illinois with a few friends, and then, just went from there to the point of, for a while, did a bunch of video stuff. It was with a couple national shows, and then one year, me and a couple of other guys did our own local show, and so...
What was that called?
Leap Outdoors.
Is there still videos out there?
There is. So, if you want to look at videos of that at all, which, I mean, the nice thing is I had filmed for national shows, and then a couple of those kind of closed. And so when we did Leap Outdoors, we had all kinds of stock footage from previous stuff. Yeah. That after it's aired and it's a year old, you get the copyrights back to it, essentially. And so we were able to produce a whole 13 episodes show, pretty much with just old footage that I had from me and a couple of the other guys. So
all mostly bow hunting or a mixture?
Mostly bow hunting. Good. Yeah. So it's all in Vimeo. You have to look Leap Outdoors, and it's not going to instantly come up, but there's some great hunts on there.
Yeah.
The quality of footage is crappy. I mean, that was probably 12 years ago, that some of it is 15 years ago, close to that some of it's from. So
recorded on a mini DV or something.
yes, they were. They were on the mini DV tapes, and so some of it is definitely SD quality, and then there's some of the later stuff we had an HD camera, but even just that is amazing. What you can film better with a phone right now than you could. I look back to what we spent on equipment when we started. because you had to have good equipment because the difference between good and bad then was huge. And now you can film for next to nothing if you want to get into filming.
Yeah, I mean, you can buy little like action cameras off Amazon that most of them are listed as 4K and they probably only film at about 720. But for some of the footage that we've gotten, just second angle stuff, if it's sitting still, it looks really, really good.
Yeah.
And for $60.
Right. As long as you have decent light. That's the biggest thing. Is light and audio on your cheaper cameras isn't going to be as good, but yeah. So did that for a bunch of years. I've been lucky enough to travel all over the Midwest. I've gone, I don't even know how many different states that I've hunted in, but I've shot 5 bucks that are 155 and over with my bow.
Nice.
So I don't know when the last deer that I shot with my gun. It's probably over 20 years ago in Michigan. So I just don't gun hunt really. For me, I would much rather take people gun hunting. It's so much easier to take a kid or a new person when it comes to gun hunting than it is with bow. Crossbows have changed that some now that you can use those. It certainly is much easier, but it's really easy to take someone with a gun and sit on the ground or in a blind and, not have to be nearly as close. So
Right. I think it's been 7 or 8 years since I last killed a deer with a gun. It was a doe, walked out at 110 yards. I put the crosshairs on top of her shoulder, dropped her, and sat there that wasn't even exciting. My blood didn't, start pumping. My leg didn't start Twitter painting on the stand, nothing. So I think I sold my muzzleloader the next day, and I haven't shot another deer with a gun. I love running an arrow through them at 20 yards.
Yeah.
I just love doing it that way.
Absolutely. Well, and for me, a big passion that has happened over the years, it went from just chasing, back just out of high school, it was oh man, if you could shoot 125-inch deer, that was what I first started traveling out of state to shoot. And then developed into just outsmarting those 4.5, 5.5 and older bucks. Yep. They're just a different animal. And so I just love putting the pieces of the puzzle together and trying to figure out those animals.
I'm working my way up there. I think I think the last 2 were 3.5. And honestly, I don't know that I know of any 4.5 or older that I've ever seen. I've seen a couple on the hoof, but it's rare.
They're a different animal.
Yeah. I was listening to Dan Infault the other day, and he said it's like hunting rabbits and hunting for rabbits, but shooting squirrels or something, or seeing squirrels. You're hunting in an area that it might have a bunch of deer, but it's probably not going to have that big one. He said they're totally different. You got to think differently for them, and I'm not that smart.
Well, and realistically, you're talking about Michigan public land. Michigan public land, you have to know what you're doing, and there's not many people that are consistently killing mature bucks on Michigan public land.
Yeah.
Our overall, our deer hunting has certainly gone up in Michigan. Mm-hmm. The level, the quality that's there has certainly gone up. But still, if you're talking public land with a bow, shooting not even just a score, but shooting mature deer 4.5 and older, that's hard.
What's your biggest Michigan buck?
146.
On public?
On public.
Nice.
So that was a giant 8-point that I killed, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago now that I killed him.
Bow season?
With a bow.
Nice. I would have been close. I hit a 140 and a quarter, and then I ended up hitting it in the brisket, and a week later a buddy killed it right a mile away on the same state land. He actually stuck it a little far back, caught the liver, and killed it, and we found out that it was the same deer.
Same deer.
140 and a quarter green score.
What time of year did you kill that big one? Is that rut?
November 10.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So I was lucky that year. I went down to Illinois, and I killed on my first morning hunt.
What'd you kill that morning?
12. That's 160-something, 163.
Dang.
You probably should let him go.
Yeah. Actually, I almost did. He's a chocolate rack, and he came in, in the morning when there's all those shadows.
Yep.
And so being a chocolate rack, I didn't think I knew he was pretty good, but I wasn't sure he was a shooter. And then he turned and I saw his G2s are 13 inches. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, yeah, that's a shooter. So I had a pretty good few days because then I came back early and then that was my first sit on public that I killed him.
Yeah.
I had done some scouting there earlier on that piece and there was some really big rubs in the area. And so, yeah. I mean, we could talk that story sometime, but that's a crazy story. I had a neighbor with me, so I had another guy with me the night that I shot that big one.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
He was sitting on the ground in a deadfall.
So what is Sportsperson's Ministries International? What do you guys do? And, I mean, how did it all get started?
Well,
how'd you get involved?
So I'll start with how it got started and then how I got involved. So Maury DeYoung is the founder of it, and he started it over 30 years ago at Kellogg'sville Church.
Okay.
And so he was brought on as a pastor of outreach there at the church, and he had a passion for the outdoors. And so he started kind of an outdoorsman's club. And 30-some years ago, there wasn't much of that sort of stuff happening. And so it grew and blew up and was huge. And at one point when they were doing their club meetings, they were doing weekly meetings, and they would have 200 guys showing up every week to just talk outdoor stuff, do seminars, and then they do some bigger events as well. So he realized the need that was there at that time. And so then like 17 years ago, he left the church where he started that and started Sportsperson's Ministries as its own nonprofit. In part to help churches start and train them in how to do an outdoors ministry like that, like he had created there. So that was a big part of it, was so he did a couple of national training things where he had people from all over the country from churches come for like a weekend long training and kind of trained them of this is how you would start it, this is how it would go. And so that was a big part of starting it, was that of how could he train other churches. So now, I mean, some of that's faded a little bit within what we do. We coach churches some, but there's, that was 15, 17 years ago. Like, stuff has just grown and changed there. And there's resources available now that weren't there before with some of that. But we have a group of churches in New Hampshire. One of our board members is actually from New Hampshire. So there's a group of churches there. There's a group of churches in Illinois, Iowa, and a few different places around that we kind of trained and started in what they do. And then all over Michigan as well. So that's part of what we do, is train churches, work with them. We do a bunch of our own events, the coyote tournaments. We do a few different deer hunting things. Every year we do a pheasant hunt. We do a high school bass tournament series in the spring. We have a small game tournament that we do. So just lots of different activities. I view it as what we're doing is engaging outdoors people. And while we're out there engaging them doing that stuff, we get to tell them about the one that created all of it.
Yep.
And so awesome. A little of my past there is I was a youth pastor at a church for a bunch of years. And then back to my passion for hunting and doing some of the video things. How I got connected with Sportspersons was one of the things that we do is speak at churches and different wild game dinners and stuff like that. And so Maury was getting asked to speak at places regularly. And if he had already spoke there or whatever, they wanted someone new, essentially I started going. He knew me a little bit through some different things, and then based on some of the video stuff and everything that I had done, he kind of was like, oh, here, would you be willing to go and speak at these places? Yeah. So that was kind of how I started to get into being a part of Sportspersons, was just going and speaking to churches and doing wild game dinners on their behalf, kind of through him within that. And then a couple of years ago, he was at the point of retiring, and so the board decided they wanted to keep the ministry going. And because I had a relationship with Maury and some of the board members through some different things, they were like, would you want to be the next director? And so 2 years ago that happened, and then 6 months after I took over from him, then all this COVID crap hit. Yeah. So it's been a challenging, last year and a half with some of that, when a lot of what we do is work with churches and do events. And those have certainly been a struggle to do some of that stuff in the last, year and a half. It's great because more and more people are engaging in the outdoors than ever. whether it's fishing and camping and hiking or hunting, whatever it is, like
So many people hunting right now.
which is great.
Yeah.
It has allowed me to do a lot more more individual things, than necessarily event stuff, because it's just been harder to gather, big numbers of people. But and just the need that's there, and the interest in the outdoors is super exciting. So
Well, and I was at your last banquet. That was a couple weeks ago, and there was no shortage of people there.
right.
I mean, there was a lot of people probably happy to be there too, because people hadn't been out in so long.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's great that, especially in our state, that things have finally gotten to the point of opening up and being able to do that. So,
Yeah.
being able to do our banquet we did it in August compared to normally do it in April. But just being able to do it was huge.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I don't remember if it was a week or two ago, you posted that you do like workshops, like deer hunting workshops.
so I'm doing so I started that. I did 2 of them last year. I'm just doing 1 this year just because of my fall. But I'm doing a deer hunting workshop. And so how I put that is, it's kind of like taking, if you go to someone's seminar, right? Like you sit, and I have PowerPoints and I can show videos and do different things, but you're sitting in like a classroom environment, right? And you can only learn so much there.
Yep.
So this is kind of like taking that atmosphere of learning and putting it in a weekend-long event. And so we're hunting while we're doing it.
Okay.
So we have our ministry has a cabin up in Pearson, and so for that weekend, what we do is I have a bunch of pre-scouted stand locations on public land. So when the group, it's limited to only 6 guys or 6 people. I can't take more than that to do it. But essentially, the first day they come, and we draw for where they are, so that there's no favorites, and I didn't, pick for someone to go to the best spot, but it's just a random thing. And I give them 6 different locations to go to. They have to set their own stand, put their own blind, whatever they're going to do for that. So it's not a guided hunt, but it's an instructed hunt.
Okay.
Nice.
So they start with that. Then we come back at night when the hunt's done, and I'll take a couple of those stands and dissect and look at maps and go, this is why I picked that spot. And here's what went into the scouting of that. You could see the rubs that were over there, whatever led to me picking those spots. So then the next day, after the morning hunt, they'll go back to the same spot just because super easy to do for the first morning. Then we'll actually go and do some live scouting during the middle of the day, where we'll go out and walk and find some more potential spots that they can hunt. And I'll have more than just the 6 spots too. So if they didn't like the spot, the wind's bad, whatever, we can move some people around. And so it's just a weekend of that, of they get to hunt in mornings and nights, and middle of the day and evenings is kind of like an instructional sort of time of teaching them, how do you look at maps. Part of it the last night is even just a little bit, if there's interest from the guys, of how do you do an out-of-state trip. If you've only hunted Michigan and you want to travel out of state, how do you begin to pick out where you want to go, what you want to do. So it's kind of so that's why I call it a workshop. It's not a guided hunt, I'm not,
awesome.
They have to do their own work. They're going to do work with it. And it's not just a seminar, because we're out there hunting and doing it. And so they get to see and experience and be out there. And we're hunting public land in mid-Michigan. So it's not like, last year no one shot deer, but they seen deer and they seen bucks. And, you're hunting public land in Michigan to see deer and to see bucks, in spots that you've never gone to before, is an exciting thing to do.
And that's why I love run and gun hunting, because I give a spot 2 sits usually. I don't know how you guys do it. This is your first year, Chris. But I give my spot, usually I'll go in the afternoon, I'll hang my stand if it's something I want to hunt. I'll leave it there overnight, because odds of somebody finding my tree stand that's in a random area in the middle of the night is pretty low.
Yeah, unless you see someone with a light on around you or something like that.
But then I'll hunt it in the morning, and if it shows a bunch of activity, there's been very few times, I think, in the last 5 years that I've still hunted the same tree. But once you find the activity, you can kind of with the run and gun system, move forward or move back and kind of go towards that activity that you've been seeing. I love doing run and gun, and I know I've mentioned it in probably every podcast about it, but I just love doing that. And I love, when I hunted private land, I had 8 different setups, and it was always, you might go to this tree this weekend, but then you're going to maybe the same tree next weekend because of the wind, and it got boring after a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't enjoy that anymore, so I just really enjoy that. But that's cool. I didn't know that that's how you ran it, but nobody has killed one yet doing that, but they've had a lot of activity.
Yep. Yeah, so last year was the first year doing it, and obviously that was in the peak of the real COVID threat, so I had, some people backed out, so it was small. I didn't have 6 for each weekend.
Yep.
But we did 2 weekends of it last year with that. Originally, it started with the idea of doing it out of state. I was actually going to do an early season Kentucky hunt with this same sort of principle of going down there and doing this thing. And then and I had the place booked. I had everything all set to do it. And then COVID, traveling out of state and doing all that stuff all became a question. And it was like, well, it's probably not worth doing. And then when I realized how much work goes into finding stand locations for 6 people. I was kind of glad I didn't do an out-of-state thing.
Yeah.
Because the pressure, like doing it with guys in Michigan, again, they're all the guys last year, and I'm sure all the guys this year will probably be from Michigan. They're not buying an out-of-state tag.
Yep.
It's $150 for the weekend, and that's your lodging and food.
Okay.
And we eat well. Like, we ate steaks and
Yeah, that's not bad.
so we eat good, so for $150 to do a weekend thing where you're learning and you're hunting and you're fed and you have a place to sleep, compared to when I was looking at Kentucky, I think it was going to be $400 for the same thing, because I have to pay for lodging, and then everyone has out-of-state tags. Like, the level that it would have placed on me to produce deer, not just as a learning experience, but to produce deer, would have been much higher. And I was like, I think it's just better to do it in Michigan. And I realized how much work and scouting goes into trying to find sticks, good spots that I can stick people.
Yeah.
And I need a few extras for wind and different things. So, I mean, like that takes a lot of work to not just have, this is a good area, but this is the tree where you want someone to go set up in. It's a lot of hours to get that amount. And so to do that out of state where I'd be traveling, 8 hours or whatever, like, I was like, we'll just keep doing it in Michigan. But
So were these 6 that you pick out for people to hunt, are they scattered across multiple different pieces of property?
So, I think I have like 6 different pieces of public that I hunt out of that 8, something like that.
So it's all public then?
So it's all public, and it's all within a half an hour of the cabin up there in Pearson.
Nice.
Okay.
So, I mean, and there's some good stuff. Like, again, I mean, people seeing deer. Some of it is in areas where they had to have 4 or more on a side.
Yep.
Because of the counties we were in with some of it. And I tended to go from there east. We're actually not far away from Manistee National Forest from Pearson. If you go northwest, Manistee National Forest is right there, but much harder to get people into decent positions. And it just takes a different level of scouting than it does land that's a little more broken up. You start talking big woods, like it's just different to try and pattern deer. So
well, and our area, and last year I went up that general way too, not too far from Pearson, and that ground up there is completely different than it is down here. It seems more hilly up there than it is down here.
Oh yeah.
And that's not something I'm used to, but a lot of scouting helped, doing it while I was hunting and trying to pinpoint locations on the map before we went. That's where we were just looking earlier before you got here, Ross. On the maps was where we're going to go. We're all going. We probably got maybe 6 of us, maybe 8.
Yeah.
Going up for a week last couple days of October through the first week of November.
Okay.
And we're just all going to go run public land and hopefully put the smack down on quite a few deer.
Hopefully we get a few.
We need some fresh loins and stuff on the fire that week.
I told the wife I might take a doe before we go that week just so we could take fresh venison up.
So do you have 6 already booked for this year?
So I just opened that up probably 2 weeks ago. Well, when Long Range did their thing, that was when I first posted it online and started doing anything with it. And I haven't done a whole lot. So I have 2 of the 6 right now that are signed up.
So you still got 4 available.
So there's still 4 available. So again, $150. It's a weekend. I think we start on a Thursday at noon, and you hunt Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, hunt Sunday morning, and then go home.
Okay.
That's an awesome deal.
Yeah.
So and you know, it's not. I put on there with it, like, this isn't to give you a place to hunt. This is to teach you how to hunt.
Yep.
You know, so this is like a 200 level class, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is an intro to hunting, you know, and someone that's never done it before. But this is someone maybe that's only ever hunted private ground and they want to start learning how to do public. Maybe they want to, you know, start taking deer hunting seriously. Like, they're an outdoorsman and they understand stuff, or they've only ever gun hunted weekend, you know, opening weekend, and they want to, man, I want to really get into bow hunting and really get into deer hunting. Or again, someone that maybe wants to think about, how do I travel out of state and what do I do with that? You know, of this in some ways would be like preparing them for that, because it's all new ground. And I'm kind of going through all of that stuff again with the option the last night of if there's people in the group of like, how do you begin to look at us? And that some of that even applies to in Michigan, right? Like, if you talked about the amount of public land that's here, there's a lot of public land in Michigan. You know, how do you begin to dissect? If you want to kill a decent deer or even just see deer, how do you dissect and figure out where you're going to go, right?
Yeah.
You know, like, to pick location and then to begin to go, okay, well, that's 2,000 acres. How do I scout that? And so part of what I'm doing there is just breaking that down for guys. This is how to take, you know, find it just a general area depending on what you're looking for, and then go into how do you begin to dissect and figure out, you know, potential stand locations, and just scouting and you know, putting your feet on the ground with some of it. You know, you're never going to put your feet on 2,000 acres, but if you can break it down into 10 little spots that you can take a half an hour and zip through some of them and look at the sign that's there, like, you're, you know, miles ahead. And just some things to factor in with that, you know, of like, in Michigan, just about as much as you're scouting deer, you're scouting what other hunters are doing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
100%.
You know, and that's part of what we talk about that weekend, and you learn, and I mean, and that's an expectation going in. Like, I have this stuff pre-selected, and I have places that you're going, and I'm doing scouting right up until a few days before that happens. But you may show up in a spot and there might be someone there. Yeah. You know, like, I mean, that's just the crap of it, right? They're 100 yards away from you.
That's public land.
That's public land, you know, and part of what I'm scouting is I'm going out there and figuring out where people are parking, and you're trying to get away from people within it as well, but you just never know.
So did you have last year any brand new, never hunted before hunters?
No.
Okay.
No. So it was all people that had hunted, but again, it was they were all people that wanted to, you know, they only hunted one guy was him and his kid, they hunted like 30 acres of private.
Okay.
You know, so they had their few stands,
which is a different game.
Which is a totally different. I mean, you hunt, you know, like you don't need to dissect your property at that point, right? You're limited. You only have a few places you can go and hunt, and so.
There's a fly buzzing around.
Good job.
I'm getting all these deer pictures. I had to kill something, so fly got.
So have you already started scouting for those 6 positions this year?
Not really yet. No. Yeah. So I mean, based on the amount of time that I spent in a bunch of that woods last year and looking at maps, at this point, I'll wait until a couple weeks before, and then I'll try and find some fresh buck sign. You know, and go from there.
So you more or less just got some preset good areas from last year you're going to try to focus on and hope that they're still turn out.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things even with the guys is like, again, this isn't a spot for you to hunt. Like, in fact, and I asked them, like, if you're going to come back and hunt anywhere in this area, please talk to me. You know, and none of them were, you know, but I again, it's to teach them what to do than it is to, oh, now I got a spot where I'm going to go every weekend. You know, like.
That gets difficult.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's a guy, I don't know, are you on the Michigan Bowhunter page?
I think so.
there's a guy probably 2 weeks ago posted that he was trying to learn to deer hunt and learn to scout and wanted to go out and learn to scout.
Yep.
So him and I met up last night, and I said, you pick the spot you want to go check, and we'll check it. he sends me an area that he wants to check out, and I look on my map, and I'm like, I've already got pins in there because I wanted to scout them, and I showed you earlier there from March that I just map scouted them.
Ended up hitting the exact same point almost.
Yeah, so he hits the same area, and I said, well, we'll go in there and scout it. I said, I've wanted to check out this one specific area anyways. We go in there, and Ross, I'm not kidding you, that area was trashed with fresh rubs and all kinds of buck sign, and we found the buck bed, and I'm like, well, crap. He says, what? I said, hunt it. I said, I want to see what you get, and I want to see, I want to come out here and help you if you get one. And he actually had just moved here, I don't know if he said last year, from Indiana, so he doesn't have anybody up here.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
I got a deer cart and everything, so if you need help, just let me know. And he was pretty grateful for that. But he was new enough to the point where old rubs that I can pick out, a whole rub line going through the woods that are 2 years old, he didn't know that that's what the old rubs look like when they started to heal. And I said, dude, this is the kind of stuff I look for, because if they're using it 1 year, odds are there's going to be travel through that same area every year.
It's about terrain more than it is. I mean, most of the time, what you're hunting is terrain.
Yep.
And it's the little subtle things that make. I mean, if you're talking more flat country, it's subtle things that make those differences in funnel deer. That's
what this was. It was so flat for hundreds of yards, and then there was one big ridge, and it was a south or a north-south ridge. And I said, if we go to that south point where it makes the bend, I bet there's going to be sign in there, which is where I had marked. And as soon as we got there was buck sign everywhere from this year already.
Right.
And so he hung a trail camera up and said, just let me know.
Well, and I mean, that's 3/4 of the battle.
Yeah.
Right, is finding that. But there's the other huge part of it is just because he's there doesn't make him killable.
Right.
Yep.
Right? Yep. I mean, that's a whole nother ball game of, first you got to get in the game, right? You got to be in the area where there's decent bucks or just bucks, whatever you're targeting. And then there's the whole next level of, like, it's not even just getting in the area, it's getting close enough to kill one with a bow and actually
not
executing.
Shaking yourself out of the tree stand when he walks in and making the shot. And but that's one of the conversations I had with him outside before we even started walking. I said, what is your goal? Do you want to just fill the freezer with does or with deer? Do you want buck or do you want a big buck? If you want to shoot some does, I said, we don't have to go very far. Because as soon as we start finding oak trees, you can probably set up there and kill a doe right off the side of the road. I said, but if you want to kill a bigger one, we're going to have to dig deeper. And he said, if a little one walks in the first day, I'll probably let it pass. But if it gets later in the year, I won't. And I'm, okay, then we're going to look for some buck sign that shows that there's bucks in there. And I'm really hoping he sends me a picture on opening day of a Brutus in there, because there's some big ones in that general area. I killed my 8-point in 2019 within 2 miles of him, and it's all the same corridor that they run. So I know he's in a good area. But so have you ever hunted Ohio?
I've hunted Ohio, yeah.
How was it?
It's good. I
really?
mean, it's very, depending on where. I hunted central Ohio, so an hour east of Columbus.
Yep.
And you're in some real, there's a lot of hills and some really steep stuff, a little bit of rocky, and some real briar stuff in that area.
Okay.
So it all depends. I mean, the further south and east you go, the more mountainous almost you get into.
Yeah.
The closer you are to the northwest corner to Michigan, it's more like southern Michigan. It's flatter farmland, broken up sorts of stuff. So it all depends on where in Ohio you're going. I mean, there's some great hunting there.
I think Ohio or Kentucky are going to be my first ever trip out of state eventually.
Ohio's great. I will say there's a lot of hunters in Ohio too.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that travel from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and come to, as well as Michigan, that go to Ohio.
Yeah.
So the pressure that Ohio receives is pretty high.
But do they only receive it November-ish?
Yeah. I mean, the end of October, November. And their gun season isn't till after. Their gun season is always after Thanksgiving.
And it's short, too, right?
Yeah.
I think it's 2 weekends
It's
or
week
something
long.
like that.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
just like
it's
Wisconsin.
and it's the, I forget if it's the Sunday or the Monday after Thanksgiving. So if you're bow hunting out there, you're gonna see some pressure. Like there's gonna be some, but I mean there's some great hunting there certainly.
Yeah. Do you? I mean, as much talk as we hear people, and I've talked about it before. I listen to everything Hunting Beast and everything Dan Infault has ever talked about in the hunting public. And when they came here in 2019 for that Public Land Challenge,
Yeah.
they were all surprised on a podcast they did at the end. And they said, as much as we heard about Michigan, you're going to get your tires slashed and you're going to run into people everywhere you go. Every one of them was like, that's not anything like what we experience here. I mean, we have hunter numbers, a lot of hunters, but I still don't believe it's nearly as bad as a lot of people make it out to be.
Well, it depends what your goal is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anyone that would say Michigan doesn't have deer.
Right.
Right? Like everyone, Michigan has great deer numbers for the most part. Like there's certain areas that are obviously not great.
Wolf country.
But for the most part, you're not going to, if you put in a little work, you're going to get on deer in Michigan. The difference is if you want to shoot a mature deer.
Yeah.
Like they're just, I mean, you want to shoot a mature deer on public land in Michigan, you are going to have to work for it. And it's tough. There's just not, the numbers aren't there, right? Like they're there, but there's not huge numbers. So none of those guys, I mean, they saw one or two that I would say were 3.5 and older that week that those guys were here. And they also had some weather conditions that actually helped them.
It was flooding.
Right, but it was pushing deer and pushing hunters out of the woods.
Yep.
And deer out of areas and concentrating them in some. And they also, I mean, Michigan's improved. Like they were hunting in some of the APR stuff, right? That had been a part of the APR for some years, which has also drastically changed Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is like before you go up into some of that stuff before. I mean, there just were not mature deer. Now at least there's some mature deer. They're not going to score giant in the area where they were, but there's at least some mature ones there now. And I think as a state overall, right? Like it's gone up with some of that. So deer numbers aren't a problem in Michigan. Hunter numbers, I mean, I know a friend hunted in Missouri last year, and he's in Indiana the year before, and he's never seen more hunters in Michigan than he's seen in those two places bow hunting.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, I've spent the last 5 years on public, and I think I've only seen maybe 5 people while I've been hunting. Like somebody walked by me or something else. I don't see very many people. They're there.
I think that has a lot to do with y'all's area up here and how much public land y'all have, because you come down by me where there's only 3 sections within 4 counties. Then you get to where you're looking at 25 people at one sign-in gate, whereas you guys, I went north last year, and I think we saw maybe 7 people in a whole half a week's time. But you go down by me in one day, you can see 15 people. It's nothing. It's talk about big buck numbers or good buck numbers in certain areas. We have certain public land spots that we know don't hold big deer because they don't live that long. They don't make it. It's such a small chunk of public. There's a hunter every 100 yards some days. We call that place it looks like a pumpkin patch during gun season. There's a bunch of little orange dots within the same field. I don't know how anybody feels safe hunting out there, but they do it. But then you got other spots like where I hunt too that we've looked at the terrain. There's reasons why people don't go there. Not a lot of the hunters can make it back out there, or don't want to, or hurt when they try to.
Yeah, that's some pretty steep hills out where you're at. But I mean, plus there's a thing where a lot of guys here, it seems like they either don't want to go very far from the truck, or they don't want to have to go through anything thick.
Mm-hmm.
I think the go far from the truck changed.
I think it has too, because you see tree
I
stands
think they go
way
too
back.
far from the truck now.
And it's because of like Hunt Wise
Yep.
and Onyx and that stuff. I mean, that has changed the game when it comes to that. Because guys used to never go more than a couple 100 yards off the road because, the reality is they were afraid of getting lost, right? And now you don't have, there's not that fear. You can know where you are, where you've been, where you want to go. All that is on your phone in a way that, doesn't freak people out anymore, and they're willing to walk.
I know some people have these on their phone, but they're still afraid to walk because they don't want to get lost.
The one down by me that shoots big deer and knows what he's doing, I text him. I went out scouting the other day, and we were talking about seeing people sign. And half the trip while I was out scouting, I was texting Josh, well, here he is, and this is where he came in. And that same guy, though, half the stands I know he puts up, he doesn't go back out to them because he's scared to go out to them on his own. He'll put them in great spots during the daytime when it's spring weather or early season, and then he'll just leave them there, and then he'll text me, and, hey, I never even hit these spots. I didn't want to go out there alone.
And there's some of that, but I mean overall, it's changed that game.
Yeah.
Where it used to be, like in Michigan especially, if you were willing, it's hard because Allegan used to have roads everywhere. They blocked a bunch of those off, and then it made it really good for some years because if you were willing to walk, and get away, and that's all you had to do is walk to get away from people. You could walk a quarter mile down an old 2-track that was blocked off, and then go a few hundred yards off that, and you were not going to be by other people.
Right.
That game's changed, I think, a lot because of all the map stuff.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too because I think a lot more people are getting more mobile than they ever used to.
Oh, yeah.
I see
certainly.
far less tree stands just hanging in tree stands now, or trees now, than I ever probably used to. I mean, I still find the occasional one I'm out scouting, but last year Steve Thomas and I were out scouting way back in a marsh, and there was a tripod stand out there. Like, why? How in the world did somebody get this out here, number one, with as far back as we are? But they do it, and I mean, that's just where it sits, and you also know that if that's there, that's probably where that guy's going to be every time he makes it out there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I do that a lot. I hunt around people. I'll use all that information, and if you mark them on your maps, you can kind of figure out an area that, okay, there's a tree stand here, tree stand, tree stand, tree stand. This section's got nothing. And there's a lot of deer activity in those sections that get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think even you were talking about hunter numbers, not running into a lot of people. I think a lot of guys in Michigan hunt that first week, and then if they don't see things, they get burned out.
Yeah.
And it's very sporadic after that till gun season.
The first week of October?
Of October.
Yeah. October, the first week, I mean, I've never done really good, but I like to hunt, so.
And I guarantee you see a decent amount of trucks
Yeah.
and people that time of year, then it fades off until you get into November and actually into gun season. I mean, unless you really have something, you're about better off driving around, and doing what you're talking about and figuring out where people are that first week of October. I mean, again, it depends on what you're trying to kill. If you're trying to kill a mature deer, the amount of time that they're on their feet during daylight after they're hard-horned here until the rut actually starts is not a lot, right? I mean, they're just not on their feet a lot.
Yep.
If there's any pressure in an area, they're nocturnal.
Yep.
For the most part, or where they're moving is very small. So you get a bunch of people in the woods, your chance of killing one is not very good. Instead, you could almost be better off driving around and looking where people are and where they're not.
Yeah.
Because wherever they are, it's going to push them all the more in the next week or two into those other areas where there's not people, right? So you're going to go from no sign in some of those areas to now all of a sudden all the deer, not all the deer, but deer have moved into there, and especially some of those bigger bucks will move into those areas.
Yeah. So what's your deal in Illinois? You lease some property. Is there Illinois public that's huntable? Have you ever hunted it?
I've never hunted public in Illinois. So when I first started out of state 20-some years ago, I mean, again, totally different game. There wasn't any of that stuff. So what we did is, back then, Pike County was huge, right? So we picked a little county, Schuyler County, that was to the north of that, in like the Golden Triangle. It was right on the edge of it. And so we did a bunch of research, and what we would do is buy plat books, and then we went down and knocked on doors and got permission to hunt. And so I did that then, and then I went from Illinois. I hunted there a couple of years. We didn't end up killing anything, and then I started going to Kansas, Nebraska, all over, doing that same sort of thing where we would go in the spring, get plat books of a county or two, look at plat books, look at aerial maps, figure out a whole bunch of farms that we would go knock on doors, go in the spring, knock on doors, hang sets. So some of that was public, some of it was just knock on door permission.
Yep.
And so I did that for a long time. And then 10 years ago when I was filming, I got to be really good friends with a couple of guys down in Illinois for the TV show that we were filming for. And so they invited me to come down, and through that I ended up getting a lease down there that I've had for the last 10 years. And I got an awesome farmer that's great with me, and so I just renewed my lease for another 5 years with that. So before, everything that I did was either public, or if it was private, it was just permission to hunt.
Okay.
And then I landed this down there, and I still have done some of the other, but it certainly has changed things. And when your kids are different ages, it changes things. And when I first started traveling out of state, I was just out of high school. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, and I did the 1 year I did a 2-week trip to Kansas and Nebraska when my son was 6 months old, and I came back after 2 weeks, and my wife went, "Yeah, you're not going to do that again."
Yeah, I remember those days.
And so then it just changed, things, and I love that, and I miss that, and that's what I do in Michigan now. I have at my uncle's place. I can hunt up in Muskegon. He's got 120 acres, but it's not very good, and it's not very fun. Like, if I'm gonna hunt in Michigan, I almost love the scouting and preparation and figuring the things out more than I do actually killing the deer.
Yep. And
so my lease in Illinois, I've had my farm that I'm on, I've had for 10 years. I have my stands absolutely pegged. It's a 225 acres, but there's not more than 40 of cover on it. So it's not a very big chunk. On 40 acres of cover, I have 12 stands.
Yeah.
So I've pinpointed everything, and they're all permanent stands that I leave up. I always take a run and gun set with me just because you never know.
Right.
But for the most part, walking it and hunting it for so many years, I know that farm and what's going to happen.
Do you get bored with that?
A little bit, but I don't. I hunt it for a week.
Yeah, that's true.
So I take kids down for the youth hunt. So I'll take my son's gone down a couple times. He's killed a couple good bucks, and I've taken other kids through Sportspersons at our banquet every year. For the last few years, I've raffled off or auctioned off a hunt.
Yeah, you just gave one away.
Yeah, so I did one there at that. So then I'll bring other people down. So I hunt that weekend with kids in October, and then I do just a week in November.
Okay.
And so I don't get to go, So do I get bored? No, because
you don't hunt it often enough.
I don't hunt it often enough. In a couple of the years, I've killed on one of the first couple days. And so, I have 12 stands, but I bet you I have 3-4 stands that I've never sat in still. Yeah. They're there. They're in a really good spot, but the wind's not right. Things aren't right where I'm not going to... And it's a totally different game. I love it in a different way. I love going to a new piece and dissecting and trying to figure it out. And then when it comes together like you thought, it's great.
Yep.
Because that's what we would do on these out-of-state trips. We'd go out in the spring, scout it, get permission, scout them, hang sets, usually in 2 long weekends. We would do that in the spring. And we would leave our stuff, come back in November for a week, and we would kill deer.
Yep.
That's super fun, And what you learn by doing... what I learned doing that is huge of what it's helped me as far as a hunter, to figure out some of those little differences in land when you figure it out, and then you get there and it either was totally not at all like you expected, and you learn from that. Okay, that didn't work. The deer are all moving 150 yards away.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, you're forced to figure that out of why they're moving 150 yards away. And it's not just on that farm. The differences of why they're moving there tend to be universal across whatever. It's just you got to find that stuff. So I love that. But the difference in hunting my farm now is like the cat and mouse game of, I know a couple of places where big bucks are going to bed. And so it's outwitting them in those spots on such a limited space, right? Because again, it's not, there's 40 acres of cover.
What's the rest? Is it all just crops?
Row crops.
Okay.
I mean, it's all row crops down there.
Okay.
So it's the corn and beans. That's all that it is. There's hardly any hay fields, alfalfa, anything like that. And so it's all row crops. And so part of what's been fun down there is to do some food plots and manipulate land in different ways, with things that you can't do on public, right? So you can't do that on public. And there's things on there that I've learned, and you can tweak a little because it's almost like a lab.
Yeah.
Where, okay, some of the other stuff that I've learned from going out of state, I can manipulate the land and do some things on that property now. Food plots, for instance, right? Like, how do most people set their food plots up?
Couldn't tell you.
They have this nice big square rectangle and they set a food plot up, right? Like, one of my favorite deer that I ever killed in Illinois, we and this was, I don't know, 7 years ago or so. Instead of doing that, through the CRP field, we mowed a path and then we planted food plots all just on a path.
Yep.
So we had one little section where a stand was that was 50 yards by 30 yards. And then beyond that, we went all through the CRP and just put just a path in through there 6 foot wide.
Yeah. And
then planted that with food plots. I watched that deer that I killed. He came out one night following a doe. And you're talking a 5-year-old deer comes out and he walked around in that food plot for 20 minutes
because of the
during
CRP,
light,
probably
because he was looking down all these lanes.
Yeah.
So instead of just walking into a food plot, right? Like, he walked in because he came in with the doe, but that doe wasn't quite ready, so he followed her in, and then he goes and he's walking around through that CRP, looking at all the different lanes, trying to figure out if there's any other does or anything around. And so, again, that was semi-revolutionary at that time. 8 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone was just doing as big a food plot as you could do. Well, you go, that doesn't really make sense. Now, last year I put screen cover up all over, played around with some of that on food plots of, instead of even just putting it in CRP, now I put up stuff that was 12, 15 foot tall.
Yep.
And I was able to manipulate where deer came in and out of the food plots, as well as the fact that when they're in there, they feel secure. You can break it up. So instead of them just, if you take a typical food plot that's a quarter acre, whatever it is, and if you just make it a square rectangle and they can see in it from in the woods, they don't even have to ever walk into that food plot.
Right.
Right? He can stand 50 yards in the woods and he stops there for a minute and he can see if there's any animals, any deer or whatever's in there.
Yep.
Well, you put screen around it or do it in a CRP. It was the first thing that we did, but you put screen around it or do it in a CRP. Now you force them to come into that to actually see what's there. And then you can break it off. So instead of just one big one, you divide it up. Now the doe is feeding different spots in it. What is the buck going to do? He's going to check all the different little spots that you've created within it to look for the does. And yeah.
That's pretty cool to think about.
So it's manipulate. So that's my fun there. Now is not the scouting piece of it as much as it is just like playing around with different hinge cutting stuff and a different level of this year. My fun thing that we did was we took and put PVC pipe in the ground. So like a 4-inch PVC pipe, we got a post hole digger and we put it 30 inches down and put cement around it and put white pine trees in it. So cut a white pine tree that's 4 inches in diameter, stuffed it in that PVC pipe, and it's cemented in the ground so you can put it wherever. So I put them 20 yards away from a tree stand. I got a little opening. I put a hole, put the PVC pipe. Now I put this white pine, and then off from it did a licking branch.
Yep.
So what it did is create a spot for a scrape, but also by doing the white pine, there's nothing more that a deer loves to rub than a white pine.
Yeah.
Soft, creates smell, because with the sap, everything like that. So now I just created a rub and a scrape anywhere that I want one by just digging a hole and putting that in there. And then, after a year or two, when it gets bad, take it out and put a new post in there, and away you go. So it's playing around with things like that I've come to. Where do these flies come in?
Everywhere.
I look over and it's on his lip.
It must smell like coyote or something down here. I don't know.
So that's the difference in having fun with those sorts of things now, is manipulating that stuff and playing around with that.
Yeah.
Because it's not as much the scouting anymore down there. So
if you let's just say you couldn't do any of that on your farm and you just had permission to hunt this farm, based on what you've seen on that farm and how deer act or travel, is there anything that you could take from that farm and come apply it in Michigan public land that you can think of?
yeah, I mean, certainly. And a big part of that is just how it. I mean, I'm after mature deer that, like, now the deer that I shot last year may have been a 4.5.
Okay.
But I'm 225 acres. I figure between all the trail cameras I had up during the summer and through the fall, I had close to 75,000 pictures. Not of deer,
Yep.
but pictures off from trail cameras. I didn't have one picture of that deer that I killed last year.
Okay.
So he came in tending a doe. But what I learned within that, targeting mature bucks down there in some ways is the same as anywhere else.
Okay.
So if you're going to target mature animals, they look for things that's different. I mean, it's different on public land in Michigan. There's differences within it, but yet those older mature deer are going to figure things out different than the other deer are. So, I mean, there's two places on my farm where I just know over the years, like, there's a good chance at all times a mature buck is going to be bedding in one or both of those spots.
And what makes them what they are?
You can't get close to them
Without them
knowing. They're different in that everyone thinks that, oh man, if I have a ton of does by me, the big buck is going to show up. That is not a reality. If you're talking mature animals, again, 4.5 and older, especially 5.5 and older, they're a different animal and they're much more secluded. And so they're not. If there's tons of does around, they're not going to be in there. And my farm has a pretty high deer numbers down there, like overall. I mean, pretty high deer numbers. But the two places that those mature bucks consistently bed are not high traffic areas.
Not in an area of human traffic or of deer traffic?
Deer traffic.
Okay.
So even deer traffic, they're not sitting in a spot where 30 does are going to walk past them.
And that's what I've read and heard for a long time. Is if you want to kill a big one, you're not going to go hunting just for deer.
No.
Because you can go somewhere you're going to see 50 deer.
No, and I mean, there's things that I learned, and then there's other things that, I mean, because the amount of the age structure being different is a total different game changer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I mean, I can see more mature deer there in 1 hour than I can see hunting 20 years in Michigan.
Right. Yep.
Like they're just, you get times of the year, and I've had 3 years ago, I had in one morning 6 bucks that were 3.5 and older within 50 yards of my stand. 6 different bucks one morning. And like that was everything perfect, right? But so you're not going to get that in Michigan, but I can learn those 2 spots that the mature ones consistently bed. I can take those things and apply them to things here. The principles of why that deer is bedding in that spot, where he's not harassed by does. He can watch and see everything and smell all around him in ways that make it almost impossible to kill him.
See, that just thinking about that while you're saying it, I'm like, I must just not think that way yet because I can't think of anywhere like that. But that's what everybody says, is you got to find the spots where they have everything to their advantage because they know they do. That's why they're there. But just thinking off the top of my head, I'm like, where in the world is that going to be?
Yeah.
And again, those spots don't tend to be where there's a ton of deer activity.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, one of the spots is a tiny little finger that you would not, you'd be blown away that we've killed 4 or 5 bucks out of the biggest buck we killed on the farm, a 180, was killed out of that finger. Like the biggest 2 deer I currently have on camera this year are on my rub tree in that finger. It's the closest to the road. Like, you would not think that's the case. And then the other is a spot that is in a back corner, but because of the terrain, he's basically on a little island in between 2 drainages. So even though there's deer that are around him quite a bit, they're always out in the field, and they might only be 100, but they're not walking past him to get into the field because of where he's currently set up. Like, there's a couple of runs that go down in front of him, but for the most part, all the deer are going around him to get into the field.
So he's hidden in plain sight, basically.
I mean, it's thick, and it's a hillside, and he's got the wind in his favor, and he's got and some does at times will bed on some of the field edges around there, but they don't tend to bed between where he's at and where the field food plots are.
I still got a lot of work to do.
I've got
So, if you were, just for the Michigan guys like me, if you were to pick one spot on a map, any spot, public land, and you looked at it on a map, topo, whatever, what is one thing that you would say, I gotta go check that?
I would say some sort of swamp water, something like that.
Okay.
It's thick. I mean, where there's transitions are huge.
Yep.
I mean, deer are transitional creatures, right? They're if walking through the center of the woods or through the edge of a clear cut, the edge of a field, anything, they're always going to pick the edge. 2 different pieces of cover, 2 different types of trees, they're going to walk that edge. Like, that's just how God's created them.
Yep.
They're an edge creature. So where you find swampy, water, thick transitions are what I would focus on.
Good. And I mean, I look for that on the map.
I'm in that
already, kind of just, you can tell on a satellite image
right
where there's been a clear cut or where it turns from pines to hardwoods, and I have a lot of good luck on those. And a lot of times those transition edges, if there's good bedding on one side of them, it's usually covered in rubs and scrapes along that edge. That's where I killed my 7-point up north last year, was on a transition line. The 12-point was just off the top of a ridge going into I still don't know how that deer never even knew we were there or came right to me because it was so loud that night. But anyways, he was bedded on the point of a ridge that went down to a swamp. And I mean, I'm trying to still think now in the back of my head, where the heck is this deer laying, or these deer laying that I can't pick out, but it's just got to be. I mean, do you ever feel like you almost need to dumb yourself down a little bit to find these kind of areas?
You have to think outside the box.
See, I'm not good at that.
So if you think, and this goes for deer and hunters, right? And it's why I think a mature 4.5, 5.5, and older, and I would say 4.5 in Michigan. Like a 4.5-year-old deer in Michigan is like a 5.5, 6.5 in other states. Okay. I mean, I've hunted enough other places. Like
because of the pressure? Because
of the pressure. Just smart-wise, right? Like, they've smarted up enough when they hit 4.5 They're as much of a different animal here at 4.5 as they are other places at 5.5 and older. And some of these people that think you just travel out of state and there's big bucks everywhere and you're just going to kill them, like, then they go on an out of state trip and they realize that's not true, right? Why is that not true? Because if you're talking truly mature 5.5 and older deer, they're a different animal.
Yeah.
And you just don't accidentally kill them, like, consistently. It just doesn't happen. No matter what the land is like. Like, you have to outthink them. And that scent and all the pieces that go into it. So you take Michigan here, and it's the same thing, right? Like, those, you can get on decent bucks by going a little above and beyond what other people are. Mm-hmm. And finding some of those sorts of spots. Exactly what you talked about, right? So it's a little ridge that comes down, swamp behind it. Like, it's a spot you're going to kill a 2 or 3-year-old deer in Michigan. Mm-hmm. But to get that next level is, I mean, there's not that many of them here. So it's finding the right things and thinking outside the box and then checking and making sure that there's one there. It's a game of odds, you know? And so if you find 10 spots that, man, this is outside the box, this seems like a really good spot, 1 or 2 of them might hold that deer. So then it's, you know, it's not just looking at some of the transition things, but it's thinking outside the box of maybe what is one of those that's even really close to it's back to the hunter's piece of it and the deer. What's going to make that spot different than another spot? And again, I just don't think those mature deer are going to be in areas that are heavy with human or deer pressure.
Yep.
Like,
makes sense thinking about spots that I hunt too, more.
It's making my head hurt.
I'm sitting here. I feel like I'm running a plane over where I hunt, and I'm watching them, thinking in my head what it looks like every time I walk through there.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the time that might be hunting right by a road. Some of the time it might be when you pull into the parking lot and it's straight up a hill, and most other guys aren't going to hunt that spot. Like, I mean, you got to do things that's a little bit different, and it's not where you're going to see a million deer. I mean, the chances are, like, you're not going to see as many deer. Mm-hmm. But it's figuring out, putting those puzzle pieces together and figuring out what makes the spot a little bit different. You know, what takes it from just a good spot to a mature buck spot, you know? And some of that's just, you know, is putting boots on the ground. I mean, that big one that I killed here, you know, like I said, I went early season and there was some really big rubs in that area. It was luck that I killed that deer in some ways, right? Like, I did some scouting, but I'd never been to where I hung my stand. So I had been in that piece, and I had done a lot of dissecting, looking at maps of it. I went in early season. There was some really big rubs in some areas. And so based on the fact that it was November 10, the way the wind was blowing, and some of what I had walked around and seen, human and deer pressure and deer sign, I went to a spot where I thought I had a decent chance. Another piece, which I think Hunting Illinois has helped me with in a smaller piece there, if a deer knows, and especially, again, you're going to talk to a mature deer, they've done things to manipulate that spot in ways that they know what's happening for the most part around them.
Yep.
Right? Like, they're aware of their surroundings. So that means in order to get in and close enough to that guy, you have to really think through how you're going to walk in there and what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Like, you even if you can have the best, finding the spot's one thing, you know, to find that spot, to get in there without him detecting you, and where he's going to still move and come past you, that's another part of the element, right? That comes into it. Because if he hears or sees you coming in, smells you, like, I mean, I know that there is tons of times when those people are close to those deer. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt. they don't know it, and that buck waits till after it's dark before he moves then.
Yeah.
You're not going to kill him if he knows he's being hunted.
Right.
And so thinking through and doing that on a small piece in Illinois has helped me think through, and again, it's a lab for me with some different things in some ways, and do some unorthodox, out-of-the-box stuff, you know? But it's figuring out on a small piece then, how do I get around and in and out of it without disrupting the deer? I could blow my farm up in a matter of a day or two.
Yeah.
And I would not have mature deer on it. Years ago when I killed one of the first bigger ones that I killed down there, it was my 4th encounter with that buck in an 8-day period. I killed, or 7 days, whatever it was. I was near the end of the hunt, and I had 4 encounters. It was my 4th encounter that I killed him, and all of those were within 50 yards. If he would have known it, and all different stands and things,
Yep.
but if I would have not done it properly, it would have been game over, right? Like, he would have just shut down. He would have moved off, whatever. But I was able to get that close to him that many times by being really smart about how and where I was hunting and wind directions. And I mean, I have plenty of times where, like there, especially sitting in a stand, and if the wind starts doing the wrong thing, I'm out of there. I'll get down and run out of that stand and go to a different one. I'll hunt some of my crappy stands that are easy to get in and out of because the conditions aren't great that day. I can't burn it up because I got no other place to go.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps me, I mean, in Michigan and just hunting in general, right? It's even just picking the days that you're going to go. Oh, man, this feels like it's not a great day, but I can go hunt it. Well, I'm not going to pick one of my best spots.
See, that's where I'm too. I still right now, I'll be 33 opening day. I just still like to hunt so much that
And you,
I just want to hunt.
You can, but it's how and where you hunt on those days that are not prime days.
Yeah.
It's not that you have to stay out of the woods.
Yep.
It's that you have to go these spots here. Man, I'm only going to do it. Again, a mature deer, how many minutes of daylight is he going to be on his feet at different times? You know, and if beginning of October, when they turned hardhorn, they totally change.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then all the people start walking around in the woods, you know, on public land and small game hunters and all that. Like, it pushes them to being pretty much, your chances of shooting one those first few days in October are slim to none of shooting a really good buck on public in Michigan, unless you're like in something super secluded, you know?
And I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask that a little while ago. How much do you think, because I know me and Josh both scout a lot right now. Right now, it's like Maine, we're getting closer to season. We've got a couple weeks left. We're about to kick off. It's time for us to pinpoint our spots and start getting it narrowed down. How much do you think that affects where those deer are going to be when we actually do get out there and start hunting? Do you think our activity finding, say yesterday I found that buck bedroom, I walked right through it. Now, how much do you think that's going to affect him coming back there? I've only been through it one time, but now I've got to go back in and dissect it and figure out where's going to be the good trees to go take that lone wolf when I go in early in the morning and set up. How much do you think that's going to affect where that deer is going to move back through there? Because we all know that the mature deer know when that hunter's there, and they change their route. They change where they're setting up. They change where their bed is. They move it all. Do you think the scouting affects that as much too?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's moving them around, right? And it's back to the truly mature deer, because they've lived through it. They're thinking out of the box, and they're in places that the chances of them getting bumped are not all that great.
Right.
Because they've learned when I bed over here, hunters are going to start walking by me, right? Like, and this is going to happen, and it just, like, survival of the fittest. They get killed, or they figure out how to do something different.
Oh yeah.
And so you scout now, and you go in there and bump them out. You know, personally, I would not go in there until the end of October on a day when the weather conditions are right. Go hunt other spots, hunt 150, 200 yards away from that spot on a day that you think, oh, maybe, and do it almost more of a scouting mission than I'm going in there to kill them. Like, you got to figure if you're playing poker, there's times when you're cashing your chips in, right? You got to do things. You can hunt as much as you want, but you got to have some of those spots that, man, I am staying out of that area, and I'm not, if I think he's going to be in there, I'm not going to do anything until the time is right, and I'm cashing all my chips in and I'm going.
So what you're saying is what I should do. Particular spot I found, looked great on a map, found a bed, jumped a big buck, because he could sat at a peak where he watched me for at least 100 yards come up to him. Yeah. 700-foot difference in elevation. He sat there, laid there till I was probably 15 yards away and jumped. Mm-hmm. Just below him's where this main bedroom is. So you're saying probably leave it alone completely until the conditions are perfect to go back in. Don't go scout it anymore. Leave it alone. Now that I know it's a good spot, know he's there, I've already seen the rubs, leave it alone and wait.
Yes. Wait until you think, when is that deer going to be, when can you get close enough, knowing what you talked about, when can you get close enough that in the morning he's not going to be laying there before you get there, or in the evening he's going to get up and move far enough that you're out of that buffer zone.
Makes sense.
And that's not the first part of October.
Right.
Again, on public land in Michigan. People kill big deer opening weekend in Michigan with a bow. Mm-hmm. They do. Most all of those are on private land.
Yep. All my good ones have been private first 2 weeks of October.
Right. And if it's public, man, it's that they had a spot and they knew some things and the deer was pushed there by other hunters. And there's an aspect of luck that the deer was on its feet during daylight. So, I mean, it's not saying don't hunt. It's just saying go to some of your satellite spots before it's the prime times of, and that's hunting weather conditions, and rut sorts of stuff. It doesn't have to be the peak or rut, but it has to be when the weather conditions are right. The wind is in your favor, crosswind in some sort of way, where it's not totally in his favor and not totally not in his favor either, because he's going to not move then either,
I've been reading and hearing that too, is a lot of times the best time to go in is when it's kind of across to where he's going to be smelling.
Oh, it's, yeah.
Not when it's from him to you. More when it's from you to him, but
you gotta
almost
hunt
like you're giving it to him in a way.
the iffy wins, and it's playing thermals, right? Like thermals, and that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
things.
That's a whole nother topic.
that's a whole other topic. But thermals and understanding wind and how thermals work in and around cover and terrain is gigantic when it comes to that, and playing the off of that stuff.
And do you carry milkweed?
Oh yeah,
okay.
I've done that for a long time. I mean, I met Dan years ago at at the Lone Wolf Video School.
Okay,
probably 15 years ago that I met.
Oh, nice.
In Fault. So I know a bunch of those guys.
He seems like he'd be a fun dude to just hang around.
Yeah. So I mean, like we stayed in the hotel. I stayed in a hotel room with him.
Oh, nice.
So like, I mean, I hung out with him, but yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, you got anything else for him tonight? I mean, we've had him, looks like over an hour now. You've got over an hour drive to go home, but I mean, I personally just want to say thank you for coming and doing this with us. You came to my house, sit in my basement, listen to my running water, swat at my flies. I appreciate you taking your time and for everything. I mean, we've done quite a few things through SPI now together and work together in the tournaments and everything like that. But I definitely appreciate what you do and appreciate your time here. But Chris, you got anything else you want to ask?
No, the exact same thing, pretty much.
Pretty much sounds like we're going to have you on again.
Yep.
And break down into some of this more. Right now, I'm like itchy for deer season.
That makes two of us.
This weekend irritated me so bad that now I'm like, all right, now it's game time. Daddy's going in hunting.
And now listening to him, knowing that Ross kills big deer consistently, talk about that spot that I wanted to go back to here today or tomorrow or the day after. It's like, man, now nerves are. I got the jitters because now I'm like, okay, now I want to scout, but I don't want to scout anywhere close to it. So now it's, I feel behind even more.
See, I feel. We'll go for a couple more minutes here. When do you feel you do your best scouting?
Spring.
Okay, see, and I feel like I do my best in season.
I guess it depends on what you... Big picture and terrain and all that stuff, it either takes really, really knowing area, and part of this has helped me in years of traveling out of state and doing some of the stuff that I talked about, of looking at aerial maps and then going and putting boots on the ground and figuring out those things. Unless you can really read aerial maps really well and topo maps and all that stuff, until you really understand that, you have to get big pictures of things by going in the spring.
Yeah.
And seeing the big picture of how land lays and the different things that you can see on a map, but you don't really know what you're seeing.
Yeah.
So I think by far the best time to scout is the spring, and you're narrowing it down to things that then you're coming back this time, and I wouldn't even this time of year, it would be early to mid-October, and then looking for some of the sign verifying and eliminating some of those, right? Like there's no big buck sign right here right now.
Yep.
You know, I found big buck sign in these other areas, and based on what I scouted in the spring, based on what you saw there of this buck bed just now, like, you don't need to verify anything more. You know the chances are he's going to be there.
And you know he's going to get you coming up that way.
Yeah, so it's a matter
trying to find back doors.
So that's what I'm saying. It's a matter of going, when do you cash your chips in, and when that you're going to beat him to that bed in the morning, or you're going to be close enough in the afternoon that he's going to walk past you someday.
And that's what I've been thinking about too. I think that's for sure. If I'm going to go up that same path anyway to get close, because that's the easiest route up the steep hill, that's going to be super early and sit and wait.
That's the problem I think a lot of these deer do figure out, is they know that that's where everybody walks, so I'm just going to sit here
100%
and watch
But,
it.
and that's what I said. I mean, how you get it, it's one thing to find those locations, and it's another to get in there without that deer knowing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think you can play, based on what we saw, you could play keep walking.
Yeah.
Because he didn't move until you left that trail.
Mm-hmm.
Keep walking and then cut up.
And I thought about that too, because I've done that before. The buck that I killed last year, same thing. Just know they're there and work around them and kind of, I guess, more or less ignore them.
Yeah.
Make them think that they're not seen.
Yep.
And where we're talking about right now, the one I saw yesterday, that's for sure what I'm going to have to do, because he would not have moved. If I'd have kept going straight on the trail, he probably would have never even moved. He'd stayed laying right there.
If he doesn't think that you see him, he won't move.
Yeah.
And I didn't even see him. I turned and went straight in his direction, and I think it was that moment that he knew, hey, he's coming right to me. And I was about from here to that water heater, which is probably about 10 yards away, and he was laying right. I did not even, but he was still just over the crest right in front of me too. So.
But that's those out of the box spots. That's some of the out of the box places you're going to find are fairly close to roads and parking lots.
Right.
And again, those deer don't blow out of there when they see a human.
Right.
They sit and monitor what's happening until they feel threatened, and they have an escape route out of there.
Mm-hmm. And he did too.
That's thick and nasty, and you know what I mean. Like
it was the thickest batch that he went, like where he dove down. He went straight down a 700-foot difference in elevation into, like I told Josh, some of the thickest stuff that was right there in that area. Like there was no way you were watching. I as soon as he came over the edge and hit the thick stuff, I couldn't even see him. I could just hear him going down through it. He knew he was safe.
And all he's doing is getting in there to a spot where he feels safe and not threatened, and he's stopping and he's monitoring and he's doing the same thing that he did before.
Mm-hmm.
They don't run in the same way that a doe and a smaller buck runs. You know, you jump some of those and they run, a quarter mile. They never stop, right? Like those big bucks don't do that, because what happens? They get shot.
Yeah.
So what do? They run till they don't feel threatened again, in that thick, nasty cover, and they stop. And again, I mean, you know, they're going to know what's happening. They don't just keep going.
Right.
One thing I've heard about doing that too is also if you can kind of follow them if you do bump them, especially early or before season, whatever, and they'll almost take you to their next best option.
At which what he did is I found him, bumped him. I went back and continued where I was already going to look at something I was looking at on the map, and then kind of like made a large loop back to that spot. And from where I seen him, I kind of followed, and that's where I found the bedroom. Is what I'm calling the bedroom. There were 3 separate beds, and which pretty sure were all buck beds. All had hair in them, so he's either alternating beds based on wind, or there's multiple bucks in the area. And there were rubs. I bet you I counted 10 rubs within a football field area, straight in a bottom bowl right below that. It was all right there where he went to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, his primary bedding's up there, and his security is down below when he gets bumped. You know, so it might be a secondary bed or something that's down there, but.
Well, I think this has been a pretty good one. I think people are going to like this one. There's a lot of information, and, you know, it as I've said before, I don't qualify myself as hardly even okay, I'm a decent deer hunter because I can kill deer.
Right.
But the bigger ones, I mean, now my head's just turning. Where the heck are they watching me?
I mean, it's no different. I mean, you look at, you've done this in the coyote world, right? Like what you do and what you've learned through making mistakes and trial and error and doing all this. I mean, you don't consistently kill those by just luck and things, right? Yeah. You've learned and you've thought outside the box and you've come up with systems and ways to do it, calls to do different times. Like, you know that, right? Yep. Like it's no different.
Putting everything together for the one big puzzle.
We all talk about the big puzzle. I think I found the box. I just haven't opened it yet. Started putting pieces together.
Yeah, it's doing it during the right time, right? I mean, that's the hard thing. That's the really challenging thing about Michigan is, you know, the times when they're on their feet because of pressure and things. And I'm going to tell you, some of those mature bucks, even when they're moving, you know, at times they may get up and it might take them an hour to move 50 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I've heard that since I was a kid. My dad started teaching me. Because we primarily stalked when I started hunting, that's what he always would say. Let's move 20 yards and stop and just sit. And we'd an hour to move that far, and it sucked. As a kid, impatient and wanted to move more, and it's paid off over the years because I've paid attention to that.
Yeah, and that's the same thing that those deer are doing. I mean, they're not busting out of their bed and just, you know, going 400 yards in a direction. Like, when he's up on his feet during the day, that's why it's got to be more than a couple minutes of daylight that he's on his feet. Because if it's only 10 minutes of daylight that he's on his feet, you're never going to get close enough that you're going to kill him in that 10 minutes. It's why I wouldn't put many eggs in my basket of hunting anything really good the early part of October.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I think I'm going to need to look at stuff a little bit different and focus on that more and try to back out of certain areas right away too.
This is why my maps are blown up with pins. Pin. Like, you got to have choice A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Yeah. Well, and here, I'll leave, the last thing I'll leave on is a mistake I made when I started hunting mature deer was, and it cost me some deer, is I went from regularly shooting, you know, bucks in Michigan to deciding, and traveling out of state and starting to shoot some deer and stuff, to deciding I wanted to shoot a certain age class, and I went a couple years without shooting a deer. And then when that moment of truth comes, like, if you're in the process of changing your game with that, shoot does.
Yeah.
Go some of those early season hunts, put some meat in the freezer, and shoot a doe, because there's something that happens. You can raise your bow up and you can fake draw and even draw on deer and practice doing that, but there is something that happens when you decide to pull the trigger and kill that's different, that you can't replicate in other ways, but by just shooting even does keeps you sharp in that way.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna go, you're not gonna get all kinds of opportunities at mature deer. So you got to make them count, and that means in that moment of truth, having that figured out, which staying sharp comes by shooting does.
Yeah, and I don't mind shooting does.
Me either.
I didn't. I went from I'm only going to shoot 3.5s in Michigan. I'm only going to shoot 3s or 4s in other states, and I went a couple years without shooting, and then all of a sudden they come, and then you get all that pressure, that much more pressure is on you. I haven't killed a deer in a couple years now, and now he's there, and then you mess it up, and it's like, well, why? Well, yeah, because there's just something that happens at that moment when you decide I'm going to kill that's different, that can at least closely be replicated even by shooting does.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty good for tonight. Like I said, again, I appreciate your time. And where can everybody find you and SPI and all the information?
So, yeah, if they just Google Sportsperson's Ministries, I'm on Facebook, Ross Graveling. You can search me there. We have the workshop coming up. It's kind of like sitting here doing this as we're in the woods, and our knights are doing this sort of stuff. So what you hear here is sort of what we do for that weekend, and
That's awesome.
and a part of it is out in the woods. So it's showing you some of these things and going, here's this, here's that. Look for this. This is why I'm going to come in this way, versus walk in that way. And so.
Well, good. Well, thank you once again.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank
Chris,
you very much.
thanks for making the long drive. Just sit down there with
Yeah.
us. But no, I feel like this one was pretty good, and yeah, we'll have to have you back on maybe mid-season, end of season, something, and talk about stories that are going on or how the year went.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds great.
Sound good? Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you again later.